I think one of the craziest things is when you look at the card, like we'll talk about like WrestleMania 17, giving our
Let's talk
overall
about
impressions.
everything that happened after WrestleMania 17 first, and then we'll go back to the show.
Exactly. No, but what's crazy is, okay, WrestleMania 17 regarded easily as one of the best WrestleManias of all time. Yet, when you look at the card, like let's run down the card with a specific mindset of like end of Attitude Era. Let's keep that in mind. Okay, so match number 1, we have. This is a tag team match.
This was like the Heat.
That was the pre-show.
Yeah, exactly. The pre-WrestleMania show.
I've watched WrestleMania 17 like 20 times. I've never seen this match, this Sunday Night Heat match.
Actually, that was probably the only things I saw because I couldn't get the pay-per-view back when it aired.
Same,
I just saw Heat.
Same here. Like this was the match that I watched, and then I watched the VHS of WrestleMania once it happened. So.
I tried to watch. I had it like scrambled, and I was trying to watch it on my TV.
That's
amazing.
Oh no, that's just a table movie. Then we had X Factor, which are the team of Just Incredible, so former ECW wrestler, and X-Pac taking on Grandmaster Sexy and Steve Blackman. So it's like, even there, you see a person that, like Keith mentioned, made the switch from ECW. Next match, the official opening match for WrestleMania 17, we have Chris Jericho, who in the year prior made his transition from WCW to WWE, taking on William Regal, who Regal has been in both WWF and WCW, and that was for the Intercontinental Championship. The following match, we have Taz, former ECW wrestler, and the APA, taking on Right to Censor, which have multiple people, including Steven Richards from ECW. The following match, you have Kane, Raven, and Big Show. So, if anything, that's the
perfect example.
Exactly, because you cannot be more WWF than Kane, you could not be more ECW than Raven, and you could not be more WCW than Big Show, who, I mean, his very first match, or one of them, was against Hulk Hogan. The following match, you have Eddie Guerrero with Perry Saturn from the Radicals taking on Test. The following one, Kurt Angle and Steven Richards, a.k.a. Chris Benoit, from former WCW.
I was like, what? For a second, I forgot.
Exactly. This is the only match in the entire card that I'm like, okay, and the gimmick battle royal, I guess. China versus Ivory for the women's championship, I think, is the only match with the addition of like the main events, right? The main events, like, that's obvious, but like the lower card, it's the only WWF match I can think about, because then you have Shane McMahon against Vince, but Shane's whole concept is like, hey, I'm Mr. WCW now.
Well, I mean, it's still, I guess.
Now we're getting to the hairs.
It's a little bit of a different perspective.
But keep in mind, the story itself is I'm the one bringing in the WCW talent. You have TLC, which include the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, but then you have the Dudley Boys. The gimmick battle royale featuring a lot of questionable talent, but that's the whole purpose. And then you have Undertaker versus Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Rock. So if you look at the entire card, the larger portion of the card actually has external or people that you didn't just associate with WWF, which let us know, like, they were actually doing a good job before they merged WCW and ECW as companies completely into the WWF. Like, they were poaching the talent that actually made sense to include into the show. Mm-hmm. And then we got John Stasiak, Keith.
Yeah, like I said, at this point, the WCW and ECW decline was happening for like over a year at this point, so that they've been poaching talent for a very long time. So yes, this is considered the Attitude Era and the end of it, but by this point, like, all of the companies have amalgamated together in this one thing. Like, a lot of the stars that you consider to be the big stars of the Attitude Era weren't really even on this show, with the exception of like the big ones, like your Steve Austin's, Undertaker's, Rocks, but like with the exception of X-Pac that was in the pre-show, none of D-Generation X, which was a cornerstone of the Attitude Era, was there. So yes, I see where you're coming from, but that's been happening for a long time at that point.
And Ryan, in your case, like, when you look at this card, what did you think about, like, a lot of influences from people that you knew, like, were sort of just like getting in, or they had been at most in the company for about a year? as of this point.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of wrestlers who had come in and really had made an impact in a short amount of time. I mean, definitely someone like Chris Jericho, who had, basically, I mean, they brought, I mean, if you're going to have a debut, I mean, having a promo against The Rock is one way to do it. But the fact that he held his own, it made people really see him as a big star. And this was, Jericho at this point was really becoming quite popular. And, even someone like Benoit, certainly, it's always awkward to talk about, but, someone who came in and really made an impact as just being this no nonsense technical wrestler
let's do the
become
PSA.
popular.
Let's do the PSA that you have to do every time you talk about him. We are going to talk about Chris Benoit, the wrestler. What Chris Benoit, the band, did is completely aside, and we don't condone
and this is 2001, so this is way before any of this happened, or we knew about what could happen. So, and then let's open up with this question here, which is WrestleMania 17 is usually regarded, as I mentioned, as the best WrestleMania of all time. Having it watched now, starting with Ryan, would you say that this is easily one of the better WrestleManias, or maybe even the very best?
I actually do think it is the best WrestleMania I've ever seen. I haven't seen all of them by any, not even close to all of them, but of the ones I've watched, I think it really is the best one. It's just overall very, very solid. I would say there isn't a single bad match except for maybe the gimmick battle royal, but it was kind of like just a fun, it wasn't taking itself seriously. It didn't last too long. The entrances were probably longer than the match itself, so I think you can really excuse that. And it was also nice to have Bobby the Brain Heenan and Gene Okerlund on commentary. I thought that was actually, that was like the only thing that probably saved that match. I really do think, like, you look up and down the card, not every match was spectacular, but I think it was really well paced. Like the crowd really makes a lot of these matches, more fun than they might have actually had any right to be. They were interested in everything, even, at this time where women's wrestling was not anywhere near the caliber of what it is today. The women's match was exactly what it needed to be. And normally, you start watching women's wrestling like a couple, the 2001 all the way up to 2014, 2015. And it's a real bad scene on the shows with like the crowd not caring and just not good matches. But this was one match that was maybe not necessarily representative of how the Attitude Era had women's wrestling, but it was a better representation. It was a better than average representation of Attitude Era women's wrestling.
Moving in the right direction.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, I think it really is, of the WrestleManias I've seen, I think it is the best one. And it just has a phenomenal main event. And you never forget TLC 2. It's just a really, really good show. And of course, like Shane versus Vince was exactly, like I said, the quintessential like Attitude Era type storyline. If you couldn't have Austin versus McMahon, this is like the second best thing to represent the Attitude Era.
Pretty much. In my opinion, the thing that makes WrestleMania 17 so good is it's a masterclass example of how to structure a wrestling show, because there's a little bit of variety in all the different matches, but you don't really get two of the same thing one right after another. Like you start out with Chris Jericho and William Regal, and that's a pretty technical match that has its couple of big spots. And then you move on to like the APA versus Right to Censored, where you're not going to get technical. You're going to get two giant men beating the crap out of people. And then now it's time for something totally different with the hardcore match. And then you have your face versus heel match with Eddie Guerrero and Perry Saturn. And then the technical wrestling with Kurt Angle. And then so on and so forth with the entire thing. Like, there's so much variety in this show, and you're never seeing a duplication of the same thing twice. There's always that little bit of separation in between the two matches, and everything feels so unique. And that's, to me, what makes WrestleMania 17 so special, is that you're not sitting there and watching the same match over and over, which is something you kind of see a lot of these days in wrestling, especially in the WWE. Everything had its own unique style, and it had its own unique feel, and it's great because of it.
I think what I loved about this WrestleMania is that this is before like a wrestling's finishing maneuver. You have to do 3 before a match ended. And something that always catches me off guard when I watch these like older shows is like, oh, you actually hit your finisher and the match ended. It's like, oh, that's kind of crazy to think about.
It's weird.
It's
weird.
Something we've talked about with some of these other shows we've also reviewed on the podcast, but the respecting of a finishing maneuver, and also just having sometimes random, like Jericho winning with the lion salt. Like you didn't see that too often. So that was, something kind of interesting. But yeah, they saved the false finishes for the main event, and it made the main event feel that much more special. And on top of that, the way the main event ended was kind of interesting. Austin just starts smacking the living hell out of The Rock with a chair, and then he just pins him, and it makes sense. So I appreciated that variety as well. And I also feel like this is a time before everyone had like a 5 moves of doom too, where you see that a lot more, where everyone has to do like these same sequence of moves before they finish a match.
And I think what's special is like, for example, the 6-man tag with like Taz, APA, and the Right to Censor. When Bradshaw hits that clothesline from hell, you have no doubt that's going to end the match. Even though the match just started, like the match lasted 3 minutes, 52 seconds, but you see that move hit and you're like, hey,
and that's
call it.
And
that's it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing where matches are, I feel like the length of each match was as long as it needed to be. Maybe Triple H and Undertaker might have dragged on a little bit too long, but I think for the most part, the match lengths were all exactly what they needed to be.
Exactly. And I think a lot of wrestling shows, and look, I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? It's very easy to talk about a show from 2001 in 2021 and be like, oh, these were simpler times. It's because like it's literally 20 years ago. It's like wrestling has to somewhat evolve, but what I loved about the whole show is it's kind of like a concert, right? It's like you check out your favorite band. You know they're going to start off strong, but they're not only going to play your 3 favorite songs at the very beginning, because then you're like, well, what now? They're going to play a couple of songs that are shorter, maybe you don't know too much about, and then you're going to get the encore. And I think the problem with a lot of wrestling shows now, which WrestleMania 17 was great at, is not every song has to be the best song at the concert. Because if every song has to be the absolute best, when you get to the last one, people are going to be burnt out. I mean, the 3 of us have been to WrestleMania, and we know what it's like to have every single match be like super lengthy, and you're like, I don't give a damn if the match that I'm looking forward to is at the end. Yeah, I just want to go eat some pizza after a while. Here, because a lot of the matches were below 10 minutes, it's like before you can even think about being like, ooh, they should call it, oh, the match already ended. Awesome. Hey, I got to see my stars. The stage looks awesome. And something that has to be commended is the commentary. Every time that I go back and I check out an older wrestling show, I'm like, wrestling commentary has objectively, subjectively, whatever, it has gotten worse. Because when you look at a combination
by a mile.
Yeah, when you think about Paul Heyman and Jim Ross calling it, this is a commentary team that a lot of people don't think about. You think about, your Bobby Heenans, you think about your like older generations, then you think about JR and the King, but this is somewhere in the middle. And I think bringing in that ECW influence, and like Paul Heyman can sell you your own car. He can convince you for you to pay your own car. You mix that in with JR and that clash, right? It's like, oh, these two people should hate each other. And I think they truly did bring out the best regardless of what was happening. And shouldn't that be the whole role of like commentary, is like, even if you're watching not something that's not great, they make you feel like that's something you have to pay attention to, right?
Well, they're the narrator of this insane show, and that's their job. They need to keep the ball rolling, but there's also this fine line where they don't need to be the ball. Like they're supposed to be in the background, but the thing that you're listening to, if that makes sense. And they did such a good job of that, it wasn't just Paul Heyman trying to get himself over and being the bad guy and getting all of the guys that he liked over. He was like paying respects to the match and the characters, even if they were the good characters. It was justification and that kind of thing, and still let you have the pleasure of knowing that he's the ECW guy and just having a little bit more insight when it comes to those guys. Like in the hardcore match, when he was telling you, like, this is exactly what Raven is going to do. And then that's what Raven did. And it was awesome.
Yeah, I know. Little things like that are sorely missed. Like even thinking about like strategy in a match, because the commentary, I really just miss that style. And not only that, I really appreciated just even noticing right away, like in Jericho's entrance, like there was just moments where they just let it breathe. Like they didn't feel like they had to be constantly talking the entire time. And those moments, I feel like, made a difference. And just being able to, be able to tell the story that was going on, but not feel like they have to get in all these buzzwords and catchphrases the whole time. It was very refreshing to hear.
It was.
It really was. And something that's insane about the show is that I honestly forgot about the card. Like sometimes I'll get WrestleManias mixed up, like between any 3 years. I remember I was up to Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit. That was the 5th match on the main show, 6th match overall. And I'm like, man, so we have Stone Cold, The Rock. We're like, holy crap, we still haven't watched TLC 2. It's like, damn, right? You're seeing an amazing match here. Now, I will say, usually I talk about my favorite moments on a show or a movie, like whatever we review. Is there anything, I'm going to flip the script and ask, is there anything that you saw from the show that you're like, wow, for WrestleMania, I did not expect this, or this is something that I don't necessarily miss? It's like when you remove that nostalgic label from anything that we're watching, is there anything that you're like, whoa, that does not happen now?
Can I say chair shots to the head and how frequent they are?
Yeah. Probably that. And then, definitely the culture at the time. I mean, the culture of the world has changed so much. I mean, I think there was some signs that were just like borderline racist that they showed on TV.
Lots of websites.
Things like that.
Like that was weird to see everybody promoting their like
wrestlingfigures.com or something.
Yeah.
There's just one sign that really stuck out to me. Just said, grab my ass. Literally, that was the sign. I'm like, damn, that would not fly nowadays. So that was kind of crazy. One thing that really stuck out to me is the ref bumps. Like the referees being taken out, and how like wrestling has gotten a lot better, I think, now at hiding that, because back then it was very common. Like you had a ref bump 2 matches in a row, including the last match. You had the referee being taken out during Undertaker versus Triple H by Taker himself, like elbow dropping the referee. But then you had a ref bump in Stone Cold The Rock as well. And I thought that was like a little interesting. It's like, ooh, like 2 matches back to back.
Yeah.
That was a little weird to see.
If there was one thing to like nitpick, I think that's definitely justified, is they did go to the well one too many times on the ref bumps. Other than that, though, and I think it wasn't enough to really bring down the show that much at all.
No, because in the main event of the picture of the WWF, that was a very much a mainstay thing. Almost every main event had a ref bump.
Poor referees, man. That being said, like some of them got a lot faster than others. Like Mike Chioda, he's one of the referees here. I'm like,
yeah, he fought back. Yeah.
Yeah, he got like a
he pushed Triple H back.
Yeah. That was some really good stuff. So if we were to talk about this show match by match, this would be a 3-hour podcast. So my question, starting with Keith, would be, if you were to pick one match from the show, and I know this is difficult.
God, what a question.
Get ready. Ryan, you got a little bit more time. If you were to be like, this is the match from WrestleMania 17. You hate wrestling, you got to watch this match. This is it. I'm pretty sure there's 3 options that you're stuck with, right? I will assume you got 3 choices that you're kind of like iffy about.
Yeah, come on. Why isn't it just the gimmick battle royal? Let's be real.
I mean,
That's true.
Iron Sheik won that thing, so
Yeah, and
obviously it's got to be him.
fun story. I don't know if this is true or not, but I remember reading it somewhere, and it's the reason why the Iron Sheik won is because he wasn't in good enough health to actually go over the top rope. So they had to like paint themselves out of a corner, make the Iron Sheik win, and that's why Slaughter came in afterwards and gave him the Cobra Clutch and ended with that, so they could still have their great USA America ending, but working around the limitations of the Sheik. But back to your question, I think it has to be Austin Rock. Like, yes, there are a lot of other matches on this show that would be great answers to this question, but to boil it down into a moment, like when that glass shatters and Stone Cold Steve Austin's coming down the ramp, his music's playing, there isn't a person on like sitting down during that moment, during his entrance. That is what the Attitude Era was, just that electricity that Austin brought at that moment, and you can just feel how big wrestling was around then. And then the exact same thing happening for The Rock. And even though they didn't have the fanciest match on the show, because how the hell could they after something like TLC, it really showed how solid of a performer it was. Like, a lot of times these big matches don't live up to the expectations that are brought around them, but until they got around to the submission part of the match, I got it. I was able to watch and be like, okay, that's why they're the 2 biggest people in the industry at that point. Just they're so smooth and they can have such a good match with each other. If you were to show somebody on the outside, like, this is why wrestling was as big as it was in 2001, I feel like it has to be Austin Rock.
Something crazy about this match, and I'd love to get your take on that before we get to Mr. McNulty, is so many wrestlers say this is the show that made them wrestlers, like specifically WrestleMania 17. I think like 70% of wrestlers that would be our age, like in the 30s, early 30s, would say that this match, because the rock bottom, People's Elbow, and the Stone Cold Stunner were so popular, it became of like, can Stone Cold hit the Rock's moves and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And I think even though this is not the first time, this is not the first match to make it happen, I think a lot of people to this day have tried to emulate the essence of like, oh, can Stone Cold hit the rock bottom? Or what if The Rock beats Stone Cold with his own move? Would you say like this is the match that really made that be the thing that it is today?
I think so. And yeah, I would think so, but it's just one of those things that's often imitated, never duplicated, right? Because they were such huge stars and there was so much weight behind it, you believe that Stone Cold could have hit the rock bottom and pinned the Rock. It's just something that can't be duplicated as much as it does. So I think it's the start. It was just never able to hit that same level.
What about you, Ryan?
Okay, so for this question, I think I have 2 answers. If
that's not fair, I had to choose one.
I'm taking the cop out. If the intent is this person, it's like they just have one match to see, but it's not with the intent to get them interested in wrestling. It's just like, hey, this person's only ever going to watch one wrestling match. Which match on this card do you pick? I would pick TLC 2 because nothing can match the insanity of that match. But if I were to say, what is the match you would pick to get them into wrestling? I would pick The Rock and Stone Cold.
I'm processing that in my head right now. And
because if you show them TLC 2 and you're like, this is wrestling, they're just going to be let down by every other match.
Well, it's true, because
nothing's ever going to be
crash.
As crazy.
It's just, you can't live up to that expectation.
It's true, though, because you look at that TLC match and you look at, once again, everybody involved. It's kind of unreal to think of how many of them are still actively involved in wrestling, like Edge and Christian. So those 2 guys were out or basically retired due to injuries, yet in the past 2 to 3 years, both have made their return in wrestling. The Dudley Boys, like, they're still actively involved in podcasts. Like Devon Dudley's a producer in WWE. And then the Hardy Boys are just still the Hardy Boys. Like that, out of all of this, it's still like just like Jeff Hardy's still doing Jeff Hardy things, and Matt Hardy is even he's like crazy now, right? And that is the whole character. He's big money Matt now in AEW.
None of them should be able to walk, but
No.
somehow the majority of them are still wrestling actively.
One of them's main eventing WrestleMania this year. It's ridiculous.
Think about that.
I still can't process how Edge can wrestle. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
No, you're right.
Yeah, for those who don't know, like Edge of ENC, he has a lot of different neck issues, and he was retired for how many years? Was it 7 years? It was almost a decade.
Yes.
From like 2011, I think, or 2012 maybe.
Yeah, it was around that time. He
Like
was the
9
first
years.
match at Mania.
WrestleMania 26 versus Alberto Del Rio
Yeah,
was his
ADR,
last
yeah.
match. Yeah.
And a lot of his problems started out around this point. You know, he took a really nasty powerbomb in a match against Eddie Guerrero, multiple things like that. So to see them actively involved now is just a thing. And I think that TLC, if you were to summarize wrestling in one image, it would be the moment where Edge is spearing Jeff Hardy, not just for the moment, for the crowd. You look at the crowd, camera flashes. That is something that will never, ever, ever be duplicated. Like, it is just something that, like, I hate never being at a WrestleMania when those types of cameras were still a thing. Like, when we went to WrestleMania, it was a lot more digital. But the whole concept of, like, you're seeing people, like, look back at that match and look at that moment. You see people, like, moving the shutter, like the rolling thing in the camera. You're like,
They're disposable camera.
Exactly. Like, I got to get ready for this. And that anticipation does not exist with a phone, because you just like take out the phone. It's like, well, I can record this in 4K at this point. And that to me exemplifies like the Attitude Era basically in an image. But I think that's a great point too with The Rock and Stone Cold, like the story that is told in that. And I mean, what do you guys think about like the whole match between Shane and Vince, like legit father and son? There's like the weird implication with like Linda McMahon was paralyzed and then she's not, and Trish is involved. There are elements of the story that definitely will be told differently nowadays, just a little bit.
So
What do you think about that?
Correction, she was in a medically induced coma
Sorry.
from having a panic attack about wanting a divorce, or Vince McMahon wanting a divorce.
That's the thing.
Wrestling.
The stupid storylines back then worked, right? They really worked, and they were done well as much as they can, like as much as they could be done well. Because at the end of the day, that match was really well executed for two people who can't wrestle to have a match. It was well executed because of how it was paced. And I mean, the fact that like I nearly got goosebumps when Linda McMahon stands up from that
It was
chair.
a hell of
like
a moment.
The crowd is so into it. As stupid and ridiculous as it was, those things worked then, and the crowd was just they were eating everything up in that match. And they ended it on a perfect note with this, like, the one awesome move that Shane McMahon can do is what he did to end it. And yeah, it was well done. And like that, they just haven't been able to replicate those types of storylines the same way.
So let me work through this quickly. My father is having an affair with one of his co-workers and wants a divorce from my mother. So I'm going to fight my father and challenge him to a big street fight. Wrestling or Jerry Springer?
Ooh. I mean,
and that's why it worked, because that was the world and the Attitude Era in a nutshell.
I just got to point out, we got to applaud Linda McMahon because she was able to stay so neutral. Like, she's got over 60,000 people in that arena. Like, I cannot act to save my life. Whenever, like, I've tried doing actual acting and I got to be serious for like 30 seconds, I'll begin laughing. I'm like, the fact that she was able to watch all of this. I mean, she watched Vince McMahon make out, like, his actual wife, real freaking wife. You're seeing your husband make out with other women and all that. You just keep this neutral face. I'm like, man, I can't say I agree, but that sure is damn impressive.
Linda McMahon
right?
can't take a tombstone worth a damn, but you can act comatose.
Yeah. And nowadays, Monday Night Raw is actually one of the ways that you can be put into a medically induced coma.
Exactly.
Yikes,
They took that storyline and spread it across a 3-hour show. Wow, Ryan, well done. Dude.
Yeah, you just went for the
rough.
jugular. That was like Stone Cold stunning the WWE.
Exactly. So we've talked a lot about the show, and I think there's different elements. Like one that we have to just lightly bring up for the sake of the two people involved is Triple H and the Undertaker. Undertaker at this point is rolling with it with Limp Bizkit.
Oh my God.
Then Triple H, it's kind of weird because he's got the live performance and Lemmy, may he rest in peace. It's like,
oh, that is the worst performance of the game
yeah,
ever.
It was so
99% positive that Lemmy forgot the words to that song while he was on the stage. He's
Not only
I'm the
game,
I'm the game.
He forgot the melody of the song, Like he's singing in a completely different melody.
I can just picture Triple H wanting to look like slightly to the sides, like, "Yo, Lemmy, hey, like that's not the song, man. That's not the song."
But speaking of that match, I think there's two kind of interesting points coming out of that. One is a fun fact that I remember hearing about in one of the DVDs or documentaries, but this was like one of the only times Triple H used a fake sledgehammer because he was supposed to, he hits Undertaker in the head. But I think what ended up happening is the fake sledgehammer actually broke, and I think like part of the wood ended up like stabbing the Undertaker in the head.
Oh, wow.
So the fake sledgehammer ended up being probably more dangerous than if they used a real one.
That's insane.
And the only other point I wanted to bring up was like they do mention Undertaker's WrestleMania streak like at the end of the match, but it's interesting how it's just not yet like something that they're really focusing or emphasizing at all yet.
Yeah, because that would happen next year against Ric Flair when it was 10, right? Because this was 9, and then it would become a thing next year. And I think the fact that we don't talk about this match really shows just how strong WrestleMania 17 was, because you have two just titans of the Attitude Era in Triple H and The Undertaker. They're not even in like the top 5 on this card as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. They're really in the throwaway spot.
It's the big match that just doesn't get talked about that much whenever anyone brings up WrestleMania
because
17.
Everybody's too busy talking about TLC and Austin Rock and the street fight and even Angle Benoit, just like the performance they had. There's really no reason to talk about it.
And it's all right because Triple H, Undertaker, they had their saga continue later on anyway.
For like a couple more decades almost.
Yeah.
And I think that in its essence, as we begin to wind down this podcast episode, is I think what WrestleMania 17 did so well is that it let you know that the whole show that you were watching, like Raw and all that, mattered. I've seen a lot of WrestleManias that we have been to where you're like, oh, that match is going to open up the show. I can miss that. There's no emotional attachment. The fact that The Undertaker and Triple H is not a throwaway match, but within this card, you can be like, oh, I forgot these two had a match in here. Lets you know that all of this matters. Even that China Ivory match, which was not even a match. Like Ivory got literally no offense, but people gave a damn, right? It's like, I think wrestling fans gave a damn, and something that the Attitude Era was so great at, and I think especially with the introduction of the Alliance and the Invasion, it was just gone, is that even Scotty 2 Hotty and Grandmaster Sexy mattered. Like, they mattered. X Factor, they mattered, and it was just incredible in the X Factor and all that stuff. It's like, any character you can pick from the Attitude Era, and they had something going. Whether it was dumb or not, whether they could wrestle or not, it's like you knew what they were all about. Then you introduce the Alliance and the Invasion with like so many wrestlers, and you're trying to balance this out in like 4 hours a week between Raw and SmackDown. Maybe you have a couple things on Heat, but then on the pay-per-view, how many people are left off? And you mentioned Sean Stasiak as a joke at the beginning, but the thing is, a lot of people felt like the Sean Stasiaks, where you're like, you should not matter to me. But that became half the roster. And even somebody like DDP, that's DD frickin' P, became a stalker. So you're like, oh, I shouldn't care about him either. And then injuries started happening, right? It's like, put it this way, like shortly after this WrestleMania, and I think that's another thing we have to like give us mild reaction. This was the last time, or around the last time, that The Rock, in this iteration of The Rock as we knew it, would be the case, right? Because then this is where The Rock would dip his toes into acting and all that stuff. It wouldn't be till like 2003 that he made another significant run, and we had the final match between Stone Cold and The Rock. Would you say that Triple H being injured shortly afterwards, like The Rock, gradually moving away, Stone Cold from this point forward, he was still there, but he became the alliance leader, and a lot of them couldn't even wrestle due to injury. So you're kind of left with like, this truly was the end. In many ways, injuries influenced it. Just what did you think about that transition?
Yeah, I mean, you did have the big people go away, and there were huge shoes to fill, but even above the injuries, I think the thing that really was the nail in the coffin was the fact that Stone Cold Steve Austin turned heel at the end of this show. And everything that was great about Steve Austin changed. I have to give credit to Jim Ross for this one. I was listening to his podcast the other day, and he mentioned that, like, you have the biggest star ever selling the most merchandise in history. The fact that you couldn't come up with something for him to do as a good guy after WrestleMania, it really shows just how much of a breaking point they were of just constantly trying to build these characters and just eventually running out of ideas because, well, there was no ideas left. And the only thing you had was to take the most popular character ever and turn him into a bad guy, and then just never being able to recover from that because it was such a harsh change of what the character that people tuned in to see did a total 180, and just there was this huge void that injuries did not help, and that's when it started falling off the tracks.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was kind of ill-timed, and I'm not exactly sure why they decided it, because didn't they know that The Rock was going to go away to shoot movies? It was like, because The Rock was the guy who was kind of set up to kind of take the reins from Stone Cold. But if you knew he was going away, I don't understand why they made him a bad guy when they really didn't have someone else to fill those shoes. Because I actually did go to a Monday Night Raw shortly after WrestleMania 17, and that was when Stone Cold and Triple H fought the Hardy Boys at the end of Monday Night Raw, and they were still doing the Linda and Vince story at the time.
That was a good Raw. I remember that one. That's when Lita got obliterated with a chair shot.
Yep, that was the first Monday Night Raw I ever attended. And you got a little bit of everything, like 3Ds through tables. It was a fun time. But yeah, they didn't really. The Rock was not at that show. And I was, the Hardy Boys were basically stood in as being the baby faces for that show. So they really didn't have someone there to kind of fill those shoes, especially with Austin as a heel.
Mm-hmm. Because if you think about the roster, what was left of it, there was never really anybody on the good guy side that could meet Stone Cold Steve Austin at that point. Because for the remainder of 2001, and during the Invasion angle, you had him facing people like Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, somewhat Kurt Angle, but it was kind of role reversal. Yeah, Booker T, where they were all good guys with the exception of Booker. But everything kind of felt less than. They weren't able to build people at that time to be on the same level that Stone Cold's opponents were in the Attitude Era, like when he was facing Ministry Undertaker and the different faces of Foley. It was a pretty even playing field, and that just didn't exist in the Invasion angle. And would that actually have been different if Stone Cold was still a good guy? I don't know. Probably not, really. So does it actually make much of a difference?
I think it's because you didn't, as you mentioned so well, if they had Sting, if they had Goldberg, if they had literally anybody that was like a bigger name, or hey, if they had DDP and he was like, I don't know, not
DDP?
a stalker. Exactly. I think that would, because,
I'm sensing a personal gripe here.
I freaking hated that. I would diamond cut at anybody that I could see as a kid there. Like, I love the diamond cut.
I would say, Juan, I'm sensing a gripe here, and I would say, that's not a bad thing.
Oh, no.
We're done.
a good thing. No, don't give me that. Don't do that. Don't be flipping that on my side.
WrestleMania 17, go watch it. End of the podcast.
A cast.
Exactly.
A cast.
The final question, people. Knowing what happened afterwards, invasion, alliance.
This podcast has more endings than Return of the King.
Exactly. No, basically, what is the legacy of WrestleMania 17 for all of you, knowing that wrestling has never met, it's been 20 years, and it's never met
recovered. It
exactly.
Really hasn't.
So what is the legacy, starting with you?
The legacy, I mean, I think it's where this conversation started to kind of go full circle, is it was the end of the Attitude Era. Not only that, perfectly encapsulating it, being the conclusion, but also just regarded as one of the strongest WrestleManias of all time. And like we said, you go up and down the card, there's something to actually care about. So those two alone make it one of the best to always go back and watch.
Mm-hmm. It's the perfect send-off to the best era in wrestling, and what a way for it to go.
Absolutely. I think that if this WrestleMania would have been mediocre and then we had everything else that we got, it will be very interesting how people will perceive the Attitude Era versus everything that came after. So at least it's like, hey, you went out with a bang, with like the best audience, the best intro, My Way or the Highway is a song. It's like everything that you could get.
Oh man,
to
that freaking video.
Close that off.
We didn't,
good.
We didn't even talk about that, but as much as Limp Bizkit feels dated now, that song did work perfectly.
It's amazing.
With this pay-per-view. Amazing. Yeah,
it's perfect. That's if you're gonna go watch one thing, watch that Austin Rock My Way tribute before it. It's just, oh my god, that is cream of la crop. They've never done it as good since.
So, friends, that's been our lengthy and incredible discussion about not just WrestleMania 17, but the whole concept of like, was this the end of the Attitude Era? Like, that's what we personally think, regarding this show. So we would love to get your feedback. Don't be afraid to head over to acastofthepast.com/Discord. We have a wrestling channel, movie channel, game channel, trading card channel, food channel, whatever the hell. We should have a channel about channels at this point. You can chat along with our worldwide community. We have people from all over the place, from Belgium to Canada to Puerto Rico, all that awesome stuff. And if you enjoy what we do, hey, the best way to support is by leaving a 5-star review. Thank you. We've reached thousands upon thousands of listeners, and it is thanks to your support. And you can check out video versions of everything we cover at youtube.com/acastofthepast and subscribe over there. So that will be doing it for this exciting, incredible WrestleMania 7. Oh, no.
I need to pause here.
What?
I'd like to make a quick clarification. When you say that we have people in the Discord from Canada and Puerto Rico, it's not just Juan and I.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's not. And actually, I should just say we have people from Boston, Canada, and Puerto Rico. Somebody joined us and was like, hey, sup? We're like, oh, this is awkward. I'm the fourth guy? No. It's not like that. It's not like that.
Now you can end the show. Just needs to get that out.
On a cast.
To the
past.
Keith.
Yes?
Keith. You don't talk to me on the Discord, do you?
I guess I don't. No.
Wow.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and we are also available on podcast feeds. So search the name, click on the Sword and Stone, and enjoy a brand new episode every single Sunday.